what's the Conservative Party for? Well, it's always been for sound fiscal management and quiet government. And it's not delivering it. It quite deliberately decided to have unquiet government when a significant number of its supporters backed Brexit.
You might have thought that the National Conservatism Conference was an obscure political meeting, and you wouldn't be wrong, but it also played host to some of the leading lights of the right wing of the party, including cabinet ministers past and present.
The Home Secretary Suella Braverman seemed to criticise her own government's record on immigration, even though it's her responsibility. Former Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg seemed to accuse the government of gerrymandering as he criticised the introduction of voter ID. And Tory backbencher Miriam Cates claimed cultural Marxism is destroying our children's souls.
In a moment, we'll talk to Professor Tim Bale, politics professor at Queen Mary's University and long-time watcher of the Tory Party. But first, we can speak to the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, who was expelled from the Tory Party. We speak to him now. Good morning, Dominic.
Good morning.
Do you have a sense this almost is like a party in government behaving like it's in opposition, sort of searching for a new direction?
Yes, I'm afraid it's the logical outcome of having collectively pursued a policy that has failed, which is Brexit. Brexit has not delivered what those in favour of it said it would. And the consequence for the Conservative Party, as many of us predicted, is very bad because it's showing signs of fragmentation and an unwillingness to accept leadership from Rishi Sunak, who on the face of it appears to be pretty soundly based in his instincts and can see that there are some immediate things that have to be done to stabilise the economy as a consequence of the destabilisation that some of his colleagues have promoted.
But is it right to blame Brexit, Dominic, in the sense that it's not as if the opposition party is articulating the view that Brexit is a failure? Everyone is committed to the same version of events, that Brexit has happened, we can't go back to it, we're going to make it work. And so where is the pressure coming? How is Brexit destabilising the Tory party? Because the opposition aren't introducing it as a destabilising issue.
It's destabilising it because it's the elephant in the room. Why are we suffering specific economic difficulties that are greater even than those of our European partners and competitors? It's because our level of trade has gone down. You spoke at the start of this programme about the fact that the tax levels are rising. Well, why are the tax levels rising? Because the government can't get enough income whilst putting in lower taxes. And there is a huge demand from the public for public services, which in fact can't be met without borrowing or with extra taxation. And the difficulty is that borrowing is just not on, that we are borrowing, but not at the levels that Liz Truss was contemplating as the remedy for the problem. So we have a sluggish economy. We are at the risk of going into recession. And a lot of my former colleagues simply will not accept reality and are continuing to pursue, frankly, unicorns. That if only we do something very different and something even more radical, everything will come right. And that's been the theme of these two conferences that have taken place. So that then, of course, does put pressure on the Conservative Party because there are different tendencies. Now, all political parties have different groups within them. And up to a point, it doesn't matter. But when it starts to become quite as strident as what we've been seeing over the last couple of days, then it obviously gives out an impression that there is a lack of unity of purpose. And that in the long run is very damaging.
But the battleground isn't purely economic, Dominic. That we are not just having strident views about how to jolt the economy with Brexit as the elephant in the room. We're also having what amounts to cultural distinctions.
Yes, that's right. And again, that some variations or varieties within a political party are quite normal. But there is an extraordinary stridency about Suella Braverman's approach, for example, to immigration, which is a difficult, intractable problem. But rather than getting real with the electorate, just going around making promises, which in all likelihood are completely unfulfillable. And this, I think, represents some of the problem. And what happens to the electorate? The electorate become just increasingly cynical because they see these promises being made, they see this rhetoric coming along, and it's the very opposite. We were talking about what's the Conservative Party for? Well, it's always been for sound fiscal management and quiet government. and it's not delivering it. It quite deliberately decided to have unquiet government when a significant number of its supporters backed Brexit because it's a revolutionary act. So it was bound to create lots of ripples across the water surface of the pond. And now on top of that, they're now grappling with trying to get back to a level, and they're not doing it. They're just increasing the levels of stridency. Yes, there are lots of complex issues in our society about people's attitudes, about culture wars, about value. But you win those by persuading people. And the evidence at the moment, when you look at how the young are going to vote at the next election, is that if the Conservative Party wishes to replenish its support, it's not exactly going about it the right way.
But would you? I mean, you would never agree with some of these cultural issues either, presumably. Would you admit to being too wet to stay in the Tory Party? And these are people who are doing the very opposite of that. They're trying to go more and more hard line.
I see myself as a conservative. I have conservative values. I have conservative instincts. But I have to admit that the current Conservative Party, not what Rishi Sunak is trying to do, but elements of the current Conservative Party don't come across to me as conservative at all. They may call themselves conservative something, but they don't really give me the impression of being conservatives.
Just on that point then, Miriam Cates said, for example, we're talking about cultural conservatism here. Liberal individualism has proven to be completely powerless to result the cultural Marxism that is systematically destroying our children's souls. Danny Kruger said there's a new religion of Marxism, narcissism and paganism conforming to the dystopian fantasy of John Lennon. Do you recognise that at all?
Well, I think I understand what they're talking about, but I'm not sure. My analysis is that one of the reasons for this is that their own philosophy has completely lost the moral high ground. And one of the reasons it's lost the moral high ground is because they have embarked on a series of dangerous policies that have left this country floundering. So, of course, there are going to be people who come along and start putting forward alternatives which don't appear attractive to me and don't seem to be capable of resolving our difficulties either. But that's exactly what you would expect to happen if you have a political party that is losing its way.
Dominic Grieve, interesting stuff. Thank you for joining us today. He is the former Attorney General, of course, was expelled from the Tory Party.
Yes, and we'll be speaking to John Redwood after 8, who I'm sure will give a counterpoint to that. We're going to speak now to Tim Bale, who's Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University and a long-time watcher of the Conservative Party. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What's your view of these conferences? Are they healthy debate or are they storing up problems for the Conservatives?
Well, I think they are an opportunity for some members of the cabinet and some people who've been ejected from the cabinet to stake out positions which they hope will put them in a good place when eventually there is a Conservative leadership contest after the next election, particularly obviously if the Conservatives lose that election. I think we do have to remember, however, that there are 354 Conservative MPs in the House of Commons, and I think only a very, very small minority of them would advocate the kinds of things that we heard, for example, from Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger yesterday.
So these individuals then who are setting out their stalls and putting themselves in the shop window, they've clearly given up, privately anyway.
Well, I mean, I suppose that Suella Braverman, like some of her colleagues, hopes that things can be pulled round, and perhaps she thinks that by talking very aggressively about, for example, immigration, that it is a way of reuniting the Conservative coalition that won the election for the party in 2019, particularly those so-called red wall voters who are quite culturally conservative and are worried about stopping the votes. But I doubt very much whether actually those issues are going to be as important to most people as, for example, the state of the National Health Service or indeed the state of the economy and people's real wages.
Well, I suppose some people, I mean, let's take Suella Braverman as an example. She's the Home Secretary, Rishi Sunak's the Prime Minister. She's in charge of immigration policy. She says that, we need to cut immigration. We need to get British people back to picking fruit, being butchers, driving lorries. And at the same time, Rishi Sunak, I think I'm right in saying, is going to announce today that the seasonal worker scheme is going to be increased, not by a huge amount, but it's still being increased, so that they're going in different directions. And I think that's confusing for voters, isn't it?
Well, I think it is, but I think there's a more profound problem here, and it's something that Dominic Grieve alluded to, and that is the fact that the post-Brexit immigration system means that actually we have a fairly liberal regime now. Far more people are coming into the country for work legally than was the case. And it's just simply that they are coming from other parts of the world rather than the EU. And that means that a government that in 2019 and of course back in 2010 in particular promised to get immigration down is simply not delivering on the promises that it made to people, because there is a mismatch, if you like, between the needs of the economy and the desires of voters and indeed the values of many Conservative MPs.
Just finally, how do you think Rishi Sunak views all of this, all these various conferences and all that, the hecklers within it? I mean, what must he be feeling, do you think?
Well, look, he can't be very pleased about this. I mean, it's an old saw to say, divided parties lose elections. So I clearly don't think he wants to give the impression that the Conservative Party is all over the place. But at the moment, that is the impression that's being given. But one thing I would say is that I think we need to be very careful that we don't somehow completely separate Rishi Sunak and those around him from people like Suella Braverman. If you look at what he's going to say about immigration and asylum seeking in Reykjavik later on today, there isn't as much difference between him and Suella Braverman as some people would like to think.
That's very interesting, Tim. Thank you. That's Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University and a long-time watcher of the Tory Party.